Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're catching this on Apple or Spotify podcast, I'm going to talk about Day 17 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, which are wrapping up right now as we speak here on May 3rd. So today, Day 17 was focused on firearms. So there were three parts to today's proceedings. First was a foundational document presentation dealing with the perpetrator, Gabriel Wortman's access and possession of firearms, and some of the criminal complaints that had been made or information provided to the police over the years, and also dealing with the forensic information obtained from all of the different crime scenes throughout the shooting spree. The second part of the day was a pair of expert reports. Now, if you've been listening to our previous videos, you would have heard me say that I expected that the experts themselves, in these cases, Professor Blake Brown from St. Mary's and two professors from the University of California, Santa Barbara, did not appear, but their reports were presented by a commission counsel. So we'll talk about those. And then finally, there was a witness, Benjamin Sampson from Ontario, not Richmond County, who was from the Center of Forensic Science, spoke about some of the forensic data that is generated in a situation like this and how the Forensic Center analyzes bullets, firearms, and makes the connections between bullets found at a crime scene and the firearms that from which they may have originated. So we'll start with the first part of the day. Like I said, was a presentation from Commission Counsel. This was Amanda Byrd, who we've seen before. And the first part of her presentation was giving just a history of the firearms that the gunman possessed. And it's clear, well, the gunman did not have a license to possess firearms, but he was able to acquire different guns from different sources. There was a friend of his, a lawyer, Tom Evans, in Moncton, where he got one. He got some down in the United States and appears to have smuggled them across the border. Well, not appears to, he smuggled them across the border. And so there'll be some discussion, I think, in the future about that situation and some border control issues that have emerged in the evidence so far. And then, so that was fine. And talking about the guns that he used over the course of the shooting spree. Not a lot really turns on the exact firearms that he had, but the interesting point was that he didn't have a firearms license, but had all of these firearms. And as we see in some of the other statements, many of the people in the area, people that knew him, were aware that Wortman had firearms, but very few made any reports of any kind to authorities, police, anybody else about that. Second part was a series of complaints that were made to the police. There were three that were relevant, that were on the record from 2010, 2011, 2013. The 2010 complaint was with Wortman's father, Paul Wortman, and Wortman had made a threat to kill his father, and so his uncle Glenn called the police, and I believe his father Paul also called the police. Now, not quite sure from what we can see in the foundational document why there wasn't at least a threats arrest made at that time. One question will emerge from all of these is whether the police could have obtained a search warrant for Wortman's home based on the information they had. In the first case, in this 2010 incident, they spoke to Wortman's father, who said that he was aware that Wortman had firearms 5 years previously. That's probably not enough. It's not current enough information to, not sufficiently current anyway, to obtain a search warrant to justify the issuing of a search warrant. But potentially a threats charge from the little that we see about that incident. Second one was in 2011, and this was Corporal Greg Densmore, who was on shift in the area and received information that Wortman was looking to kill a cop. So pretty stark information to receive, and so he created a bulletin that goes up in the Criminal Information Service in Nova Scotia, so other police services could see that. And there's some evidence that there was discussions held with Halifax Police and I think the Amherst Police as well about that complaint. Now, the problem with that is that information was sitting there on a bulletin, but it disappears after a few years, and so it was not available more recently, if anybody was looking into Wortman and his behavior. Not a lot of detail on that, and as I'll come back to this, but when the foundational documents themselves are posted, the presentations were fairly brief. Then the longer documents are posted, but none of the links work. So I couldn't see the actual bulletin, the Criminal Intelligence Service bulletin. I could not see the statement from Corporal Densmore, and then there were some other statements from other officers as well, which are not yet active links on the Mass Casualty Commission website. So I know what they've said, they'll be posting those 2 days forward, which is not very helpful if they're hoping that we'll digest this information today. If we can't see the full statements, it's going to be more difficult to do so, and probably part of their thinking. So the third complaint was in 2013, and this was from Brenda Forbes, who was a neighbor, a military veteran. Her and her husband had moved to the area to get to retire in peace and quiet. But then she became friends with Lisa Banfield. By the way, this information didn't come in the foundational document presentation today, which was quite brief. Brenda Forbes' complaint has been the subject of several other media reports, which were much more extensive than the foundational document presentation this morning. She had complained that she had been told about a domestic violence incident involving Miss Banfield being the victim of that domestic violence, and that there were other witnesses, other male witnesses who saw Wortman commit this violence. The police contacted these witnesses, or purported witnesses, none of whom would cooperate, including Miss Banfield, in the investigation, so nothing happened from it. So Miss Byrd, when she was saying this, giving this brief overview, briefer than I've just given, said that there were discrepancies in the details of her complaint, but she didn't explain what those discrepancies were. So I went through the foundational document, and it appears that the discrepancy is that Miss Forbes says there was a domestic violence complaint that she made to the police. The police note at the time from the officer investigating calls it, I think it was Troy Maxwell, called it a disturbance complaint. So nothing specific to do with domestic violence. It suggests that's probably an issue on the note-taking part of that, and not on the complaint-making part of Miss Forbes. From what I've read of Miss Forbes and her husband, the very credible witnesses, he had made a statement to the police as well. This was in other articles, not mentioned this morning, that Wortman had firearms. He had seen them and made a complaint to the police, and that was not followed up on either. So when you look at all of these, you think, well, could or should the police have done something at the time? They did investigate the complaint of Miss Forbes, but nobody seemed to have put the three pieces together in an intelligence fashion to, come up with a search warrant application or make any moves in that direction. There was an interesting note in there. There was Constable Greg Wiley, whose statement is also not yet posted to the Commission website, who was investigating a theft of tools that Wortman had made, had complained that he had been the victim of a theft of some tools. Wiley went out to meet him and said, well, this community policing, we're supposed to get to know people, so he says he did, went to see Wortman every once in a while. So I'd be interested to see what the rest of that statement entails, because maybe he got to know him. He said he never saw any guns in the home. Now, I also know that Wortman had many hiding places for firearms in the home, so maybe not a surprise that Constable Wiley didn't see any while visiting, but they were certainly there, from what we've heard. So the other part of Miss Byrd's statement, or her presentation, was to go through all of the victims and their forensic information and identify what's been discovered. And in a very summary fashion, she just went to sort of one by one, and talked about what bullets were found, if they were connected back to particular firearms. In some cases they couldn't be. Most of the time they were either connected directly, or else they were able to match a bullet that was found with a bullet that still remained in the particular firearm. Notably, for those that have been following this part of it, Corrie Ellison's death, the bullets there, and there were there was one particular found that was in pretty good shape within his clothing, was not connected to any firearms possessed or possessed at any time by Wortman. So questions remaining in that scenario. Now, when she was going through the number of people and going through the list of casualties, when she got to Kristen Beaton, I noticed that Miss Byrd, the lawyer for the Mass Casualty Commission presenting the foundational document, got kind of emotional about that, and it kind of caught me off guard a little bit, because she was going through with a very flat affect, just going, okay, this bullet, it was forensic, it was kind of dry forensic evidence that she was, she was unfolding for us, she was presenting. But got quite emotional when she got to Kristen Beaton, who was pregnant at the time she was killed. I don't want to be unkind to Miss Byrd, but for young lawyers that are watching that, you really try not to do that. You really need to control your emotions, no matter what the scenario. It really, I think, hurts your professional credibility if you end up getting emotional about the scenario that's in front of you. You have to try to keep that under control. So that was that, but I want to connect that, I'll talk about the final part of the day before I come back to the reports. The final part of the day was Benjamin Sampson, who was, like I said, from the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto, and he was talking about how that's done. When you get a bullet that's been used, how do you check it to see if it can be matched back to a firearm? They do that very well, very CSI kind of stuff. It would have made sense to me to have Mr. Sampson's evidence happen at the same time as they were discussing each particular case. Instead, we had this, sort of just listing off of each individual casualty in a very flat way. And then later, Mr. Sampson's expert testimony was very dry. It didn't seem to be connected to anything in terms of the evidence, even though obviously it was used in order to gather the evidence we heard earlier. So again, just another example, I think, of a disorienting way of presenting the evidence by the Mass Casualty Commission in a way that could be improved by combining those two. Have the witness testify to what he understands and knows, and then connect that to what the actual scenario that was unfolding and the evidence that that's been discovered. So just another example of that. The middle part of the day was two presentations of expert reports, and this was very curious. I mean, so Mr. Sampson, the witness that we had this afternoon, appeared by video from Toronto, but there's Professor Blake Brown from St. Mary's University right there in Halifax, who did not appear to present his report or to be questioned about it by other parties. Instead, we had Mass Casualty Commission lawyer Jennifer Cox present the expert report for him, which was not as good as getting the actual expert themselves, of course. So it's curious to me. I see Parker Dunham has noted on Twitter that the Marshall inquiry, which is sort of the gold standard of inquiries in Nova Scotia, certainly maybe in Canada even, that inquiry had 3 lawyers, 1 investigator, and 1 communications person. This commission has like 15 lawyers, I think 4 or 5 investigators, maybe more, or more than, I think 8 investigators and 4 communications people. So many more people. Maybe everybody just needs to get a speaking role during the proceedings, but it would have been better, in my view, to have the actual experts themselves, Professor Brown, and then Professor Tober, and the other professor from University of California, Santa Barbara. So that presentation as well. The second presentation was on mass shooting and masculinity. As anybody who's followed the news would probably be aware, most of the time, almost all the time, mass shootings are committed by men, and there's lots of issues there, psychological issues, and some sort of predictive stuff as well that we may think about, but there's a connection there. So like I say, none of the background documents to the foundational document are yet posted, so there's more questions about some of these things. As we've come to learn, the foundational document presentations don't always cover everything that's available, and so we need to dig further, and I will once those are posted. But that was what I saw today from the presentations. Some important but fairly dry kind of presentations on the firearms regulations and that sort of thing. So that was it for today. The interim report, like I said, was issued yesterday. I did a report on that, which you can view. And otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, there's a witness in the morning that's going to talk more about police uniform disposal. I'm not sure what more we need to learn about that, but we will see that tomorrow. And then it'll be up for the time for the lawyers for the various parties to talk about all of this forensic evidence, talk about what witnesses we should yet hear from, and what other evidence may be helpful in dealing with this part of the story. So we'll watch that tomorrow. Probably I wouldn't expect that to take more than half of the morning. So once that's done, we'll post something here with my review, and hope you'll tune in and watch, like and share and subscribe, all those good things. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.